You're paying more for stuff now than you did before. That is not a surprise given inflation. Some of these numbers don't add up. Economists think there may be something dodgy going on. That as prices have gone up, some retailers are padding those rises to rake in extra profits. They've even got a name for it.
Greedflation.
Greedflation, quote unquote.
Talking about greedflation.
We've seen a lot of businesses making record amounts of profit. So people are saying maybe part of the reason why prices have risen so much is because businesses are just being too greedy.
A look at cost comparison website Price Spy sees prices all over the place. Last year, smartphones were up 13% on average, but Apple increased by 12%, Samsung only 7%. Smartwatches were up 16%. Apple smartwatches went up a whopping 28%. Dyson vacuums stayed flat, Miele suckers rose 5%. But if you bought Samsung, you paid 29% more.
Some of the increases are happening because of exchange rates. Some of them are happening because global firms don't have to provide discounts because there's just a shortage of product. But we have very little control in New Zealand in affecting those things.
The Reserve Bank is battling ballooning costs, but say they don't have insightful data on how corporations are making their profits.
Yes, we need more analysis, more data, more transparency, because, we want New Zealanders to have confidence that we're not being ripped off.
When it comes to paying more for everyday items, we're left with little choice than to follow the herd. But are we getting fleeced for more than they're worth? Joining us now, Craig Rennie from the Council of Trade Unions. And Craig, a recent Business New Zealand study says greedflation isn't happening here in New Zealand so much. Do you think that's true?
Well, the headline may say that, but the report doesn't quite say that. It says that the majority of costs that have gone up in New Zealand have gone so as a consequence of prices driven by price inputs, things like fuel or shipping costs. But it also finds an important role for profits and for wages. And so it's not quite as simple as simply saying there's no such thing as greedflation. There's certainly an important role that profit's playing. And if we look around the world, then organisations as diverse as the European Central Bank, the Australian Institute, the US Federal Reserve, the IMF, they're all pointing to the important role that profits are playing in driving prices right now. So we'll be very surprised if there was nothing at play here in New Zealand in that space.
It's sort of implied that we're stuck with prices on certain items due to greedflation happening overseas. But what about, like our local supermarkets making enormous profits?
Well, certainly not wrong. Some companies are making enormous profits. The big four banks last year made $7.2 billion, or $1,384 per person in New Zealand. Air New Zealand saw a rise of 128% in its profits last year. The solution here is competition. The solution is making sure that we've got plenty of people who are supplying goods and services and that we have genuine competition in markets in New Zealand. And it's one of the things that we've really struggled over the past few decades to deliver.
Craig, so what? I mean, isn't it a business's job to make as much profit as possible? Isn't this just a sign that it's a successful business?
Well, a successful business is a sustainable business. It's a business that's got customers going into the future. And I would argue that a firm that's making supernormal profits, that's making giant profits right now, is really doing so at the expense of its customers. And customers won't forget that.
And Craig, is New Zealand in a worse spot than other countries when it comes to inflation? We sort of feel like we're being pretty hard done by down the bottom of the world.
It's really easy to feel sorry for ourselves and to really think that we're the one doing it tough. But in reality, this is a worldwide phenomenon. This is something that's being experienced not only in New Zealand, but in Australia and Canada and the US and the UK. There are plenty of jurisdictions that we often compare ourselves to that have suffered from inflation and continue to suffer from inflation. And so the real challenge is not actually changing the prices, not just looking at the cost of living, but making sure that wages are following the cost of living and making sure that those who are in the most vulnerable communities aren't being left further and further behind. And those are matters that are within our control.
Appreciate your time, Craig. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I don't know if it's greedflation, but I've been to restaurants recently and noticed the price is going up. But then if they're paying an extra 50 cents for a carrot, they might not put that 50 cents on the meal. They say, we have to put the price up, let's put it up by $1.
Yeah. I guess restaurants are almost a perfect example of the system working well, right? If there's 100 Italian restaurants in Auckland, none of them will be able to get away with charging a lot more than the others. Right. But supermarkets, there's only 2 of them. Banks, 4 of them, and they seem to be able to get away with heaps. they're doing that banking investigation actually shortly. The government's just announced, so hopefully that will sort things out for us. Might see those interest rates coming down.
In the meantime, why do you love businesses making big fat profits so much? You're like, oh, I love them making profits. I want to marry them. I want to kiss them.
Sometimes you don't know, though, greedflation. I mean, it took the car in to get fixed, and they say, you know, it's $1,000. You go, I suppose. Yeah, I got nothing to compare it to. I don't know. I'm not a mechanic.
Yeah.